Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is the Insight segment. I'm Harold Fisher. After months of threatening a federal takeover, President Trump today declared a public safety emergency in the District of Columbia, calling up the National Guard and placing a federal commissioner in charge of the Metropolitan Police Department. Saying it's Liberation Day in D.C., Trump vowed to rescue the nation's capital from what he called crime, bloodshed, bedlam, squalor, and much worse.
I'm announcing a historic action to rescue our nation's capital from crime, bloodshed, bedlam, and squalor, and worse. This is Liberation Day in D.C., and we're going to take our capital back. We're taking it back. Under the authorities vested in me as the President of the United States, I'm officially invoking Section 740 of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act. You know what that is? And placing the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department under direct federal control.
So what does all of this mean for residents of Washington, D.C. at a time when police data shows a drop in violent crime and that city curfews are working? Is it a crime-fighting effort or a power grab? Well, joining me to talk about this tonight are Zakiya Sankara-Jabbar, co-founder and executive director of Racial Justice Now, Marcus Batchelor from People for the American Way, and Dr. Oye Owelowa, DC's U.S. Shadow Representative. Thank you all so much for joining this important conversation. I want to start, first of all, with Dr. Owelowa. There's so much to unpack here, but I want your gut reaction to what President Trump's announcement says to you, especially as it relates to National Guard troops and maybe even additional military patrolling the streets.
Yes, thanks for having me, and thank you for bringing us here for this conversation. When it comes to today's announcement, it really shows that D.C. is an occupied territory. We're talking about 700,000 district residents who want to be treated fairly, like our neighbors in Maryland or Virginia.
Zakiya, while we're trying to get him his technical issues squared away, you were nodding your head when he started speaking.
Yes. Seems like he's still trying to talk there.
Don't worry about that. Go ahead. I'd like to get your reaction, please.
Okay, great. Yes, I agree with the previous speaker that DC is certainly an occupied territory at this point. Sadly, this was one of our worst fears for me, my organization, and our base. Our base includes a group of young Black male scholars, young people from the age of 14 to 25 in Montgomery County. Many of those young people frequent Washington, D.C. And so we see this as a direct attack on Black youth. They have been demonized in the media, criminalized, their parents, for justification to use law enforcement. We fear to shoot youth on sight and to arrest them and to cage them without due process. We're very, very afraid for Black youth with this directive from the president sitting there with the Secretary of the military. That says a lot.
Mm-hmm. Marcus, your reaction upon hearing this announcement?
Yeah, I'm outraged. It's an affront to the limited home rule that we have here in the District of Columbia, but it's par for the course for President Trump. It's not about public safety. It's never been about public safety for President Trump. It's about power. And in a city where over 90% of residents voted against him and his values 3 times, he has now usurped our local leaders in order to have his will done so that he doesn't have to see unhoused people on the street on his way to his golf course, so that he doesn't have to deal with the very real symbols of the problems that he's causing nationwide, right? The lack of housing, the lack of support for young people, the lack of investment in public education. DC is not a perfect city, but neither are any cities around the country, but we deserve the power to decide our own future. But when it comes to not just the president's rhetoric on public safety in DC, his record is trash. Every time the president has had the opportunity and the authority to protect public safety here in the District of Columbia, he has failed. When peaceful protesters were out in Lafayette Square, opposing his policies and raising their voice for change, he brought federal agencies to pepper spray and tear gas those people, putting people in the hospital. On his way out of the door during his first term, he held back National Guard authority that he had when rioters stormed the Capitol and attacked DC police officers. Right.
That's right.
When he was on his way back in, right, to office this time, after we worked hard to prosecute and convict 1,500 people under local and federal law, violent criminals, he pardoned every single one of them. So not only should the rhetoric concern us, but his record on public safety means that not only will public safety not get better in the District of Columbia, it actually stands to get worse under President Trump.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Owella, while we have you back, thank you so much. Please continue with your thoughts and your reaction to this announcement.
Yeah, I wanted to further highlight the fact that unlike anywhere else in this country, we are an occupied area. You know, when we talk about DC statehood, it's not just about voting representation in Congress, which is very important. It's also about how we're able to control our budget. You know, you saw $1.1 billion being frozen from us, which could be used to improve our public safety. Talking about legislation that's able to be overturned by Congress, and at a time where DC, as Marcus mentioned earlier, did not vote overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. We're seeing him weaponize his agenda against Black and brown people and what he considers political enemies. You know, DC is not more dangerous than St. Louis, not more dangerous than New Orleans, not more dangerous than all these other cities that are in red states. But you don't see Donald Trump focusing on them. They focus on us, New York, Los Angeles, the cities in what he calls blue states, where he feels like he can act political revenge against, and we all have to speak out against them.
Well, to your point, I want you to also react to some comments that he did make, very similar to what you were referring to.
The murder rate in Washington today is higher than that of Bogota, Colombia, Mexico City, some of the places that you hear about as being the worst places on earth, much higher. This is much higher. The number of car thefts has doubled over the past 5 years, and the number of carjackings has more than tripled. Murders in 2023 reached the highest rate probably ever. They say 25 years, but they don't know what that means because it just goes back 25 years. Can't be worse. Our capital city has been overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals, roving mobs of wild youth, drugged out maniacs and homeless people. And we're not going to let it happen anymore. We're not going to take it.
Dr. Owella, to the point that the president was making, yes, in 2023, we did see a spike in crime in the District of Columbia, but it would seem to me that this was selective use of the numbers because we are now in 2025 and things have changed.
Well, what we're seeing from President Trump is he's not evidence-based or facts-based. He thinks about clickbait and trying to own the libs or whatever that means on Twitter. So he doesn't really care about us having a 26% drop in violent crime. He's not concerned with the fact that we are already the most over-policed jurisdiction in America. He just assumes that whatever he says goes, or whatever he can own Fox News highlights can work. What I'm really concerned about is all the people doing a lot of work around the scenes to reduce crime in our city are now going to be lumped into some sort of conclusion that his grand deal of taking over the federal or our MPD is going to be a big difference. I'm concerned that Congress is going to give him the powers to not make this only 30 days, but make this a perpetuity. I'm also concerned that he's going to use all of his energy to capitulate a lot of our elected leadership in DC and going his way. So I think we all need to stand up. I think we all need to point out the facts and make sure people all across this country understand what's going on here in DC.
Zakia, your thoughts about what the president was saying regarding those cherry picking of the numbers?
Well, it's consistent. We know that this president is also a liar. That's very, very important for us to remember. The other piece that I'm, really concerned about, because, DC statehood, that home rule, that's extremely important. We know that everyone that lives in DC, as our previous speakers, is under, control of this federal government now. With that, and we cannot forget the fact that he labeled young people in DC as thugs. Okay. That is to demonize and take down particularly Black male youth in the eyes of the public, to justify their perpetual incarceration and to justify even their death. I can't say that enough. We're talking about, he called on children as young as 14 to be snatched off the streets, treated as adults, and charged as adults. These young people need support. I have a hard time believing that if the majority of young people in Washington, D.C. were white, that we would hear this same level of rhetoric. Would he use the term thugs when talking about young people in D.C.? I really want families and parents, particularly in D.C., I'm a mother as well. If you're listening to this, do everything in your power to protect young people from this takeover of the DC Police Department and potentially the National Guard. This is very dangerous times.
Marcus, Zakia makes such an important point. How should DC residents react to this? And do you think that it matters where you live when you think about how you react to this in the district, where you live in the district?
Well, the unfortunate part is, I think the fortunate part for America is that this experience is, at least right now, unique among Americans. I think the fortunate part for DC residents in this unfortunate situation is, I think we are going to have to learn from people who are currently around the world living under authoritarian regimes, where leaders can bring police to any neighborhood, can bring police to your park, can bring police to your school, and arrest you for no reason. We've seen him weaponize federal agencies like ICE, not just to detain people locally, but to displace people across the globe that he deems illegal. And I think that we, as DC residents, now have to face that very real reality that he's willing to weaponize not just over a dozen federal agencies, not just the National Guard, but even our neighbors, the folks who work in our police department against us, to incarcerate more of us. That is a very real reality that we now have to live with. But what DC residents have to do is resist it at every stance. Representative Owolowo is right. All of our leaders have to resist this, full stop, and use every tool in our arsenal to resist it, whether it's the courts, whether it's petitioning folks in Congress to turn this back. We have to, whether it's calling our neighbors across the country to tell their congressmen to lean into this issue. This is a democracy issue, and to frame it like that it might be DC today, but we see that Trump will use every mechanism, legal and illegal, to make it your neighborhood tomorrow. And if we don't stop him here, there's no way to stop him everywhere else.
Before I take a break, Dr. Owolowo, I want you to have a final word to share about this, because at least from my perspective, we are, as of today, the farthest away from DC statehood that we have ever been. And what would you say to Mayor Bowser, to the DC Council, to Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, what does resistance look like in addressing this issue? Real quick before I take the break, please.
Absolutely, and I appreciate that question. I think the one word that comes up is worthy, right? I think today's action is trying to prove DC residents are not worthy of proper leadership. The unhoused community is unworthy of being respected. And I think before we stand up and before we talk to other elected officials across the country, we have to remind ourselves that we're worthy. The young Black boys in Ward 7, Ward 8 that may go outside and see the National Guard in their streets, they're worthy of being respected. They're worthy of being treated with dignity, and they're worthy of stand up for themselves and making sure that other people stand up for them. And sometimes when we capitulate, sometimes when we don't speak out, people forget our worthiness. We are worthy of being residents of a state, and we're worthy of not being mistreated by Donald Trump. And I believe that's something that's really important for DC residents and those who live, love, and stop by the District of Columbia need to understand. We're not just the White House. We're not just Congress. We're 700,000 people worthy of being treated better.
Thank you so much, Dr. Oye Awolowo, DC Shadow Representative. I appreciate your time, sir, and we will be talking to you again. I need to take a quick break, but we want to remind our listeners that you can hear this and every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The Original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is next on WHUR. This conversation continues on Sirius XM, channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM, channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation about the federal takeover of DC's Metropolitan Police Department. Our guests are Zakia Sankara-Jabbar, co-founder and executive director of Racial Justice Now, and Marcus Batchelor, People for the American Way. I do want to take just a little step back and give this some historical context, not just recent history, but let me go back into the Wayback Machine with Peabody and Sherman just a little bit. There is a control board issue in the District of Columbia that we saw decades ago, where the DC was, operated by, a federal control board. It really had, as the name suggests, no control over how things were done. But I would also say that the last time that we have seen the federalization of public safety, specifically police, was during the Nixon administration. That's how far back this issue goes. Zakia, when we talk about the historic context of this and the impact of the federalization of police departments on Black people, but for those who aren't old enough to remember, kind of share your thoughts about that.
I'm sorry, I did not hear all the question.
Well, I was asking about the federalization of police and what this means just from a historic perspective for Black people. Yes. Your thoughts about that?
Yes, sir. This is, as I mentioned, a continuation, right, of the targeting, the historic generational targeting of Black people, and particularly Black boys and men. To federalize the police, as I mentioned earlier, this is very dangerous. These people, we already see that when law enforcement kills, maims, beats Black folks, 9 times out of 10, they are never held accountable. We already know that under this administration and with this, federal government, privatizing or taking over the Metropolitan Police Department and even sending in law enforcement, the immediate thought I had, honestly, Harold and Mark, I said, I hope that at least officers with a decent heart, Black officers, refuse, because there's historical precedent happened in India where the military, they laid down their arms. We're not going to do this. We're at that point. This administration. And I have to say, finally, when it comes to Black youth, when it comes to Black people, we have leaders in this country, right? We have organizations that we control and manage. If President Trump is truly interested in making sure that public safety is what it is, and he's concerned about the thugs, which we all know he's talking about Black youth, get on the phone and call Minister Louis Farrakhan, okay? He organized 2 million Black boys and men in 1995. His organization has the history of protecting and organizing and creating upright men within our community. He is one of the leaders in this community. And furthermore, they have chapters in just about every major city, including Washington, D.C. If no one has called on organizations like the Nation of Islam and other community-based organizations who have a history and a track record within the Black community, then we know that he's not serious. We know this is about killing and incarceration of Black youth.
So let me ask you both this, and Zakiya, I will ask you first, and Marcus, you can also react. We know that even though the numbers are down from 2023 to 2024, from 2024 to today, that we still have an issue with crime in the city, particularly as it relates to our youth. So certainly, Zakiya, what the president is attempting to do is an add military and stir kind of solution. But
Black youth don't need that. Black youth
hold on, let me make the point, because there are some Black folks who would agree that there needs to be a more holistic way of doing this, that more money needs to be put into programs, and Black parents need to stand up. And then you have some other folks who are saying, I'm tired of the foolishness and the chaos. I don't have any kids. My kids are adults. I raised my kids. But what's wrong with the rest of us? How do you address that?
I address that by saying we know, again, that when people's basic needs are met, we know that crime in general goes down, regardless of race. There's a direct correlation between class and economics, perpetual poverty, and its correlation to what I call crimes of poverty. Now, I know that there are some Black people, as you mentioned, that say things like that, right? They blame, and I call it victim blaming parents as well. Because 9 times out of 10, if there are young people who are out here and they're getting in trouble, you also have a parent that needs help. I need us to begin to have grace for our own people. These are people and families living in communities that have been under siege for decades. They have been disinvested in for decades. And the response is the military? No, the response is care. The response is love. The response is, as I mentioned earlier, you call on the people within that said community who have a track record in that community of organizing their own people. The Nation of Islam, the Minister Farrakhan, and so many other organizations have a history in DC. Mayfair Mansions, if I can give another historical reference. Okay, we don't forget about that. If you want something done amongst our people, we know how to do it. You call us, you call our leaders. Don't you send the military in here to kill our kids. We got them. Don't you send the police in here to kill our kids. We got them. We know how to organize. Those of us who love Black children and want to ensure that we have a future, tell the president to stand down and call on Black leaders. These are our children. They are our responsibility. And if you're serious, you need to fund Black-led organizations all around this country. Finally, let me give a shout out to the mayor of Baltimore. Baltimore, after the uprising about Freddie Gray, they invested over $20 million in what's called the Baltimore Youth Fund. Where is Washington, D.C.'s Youth Fund? Where is Cleveland, Ohio's youth fund? Dayton, Ohio, all over this country. Where is the $20 million to invest in young people to make sure they have access to a high quality education, make sure they have access to a job, make sure they have access to upward mobility and not perpetual incarceration and death?
So for those of you who are listening, who may not be familiar, and Marcus, I'll let you jump in a bit, but I need to make sure that I provide the context and the information for those who may not be old enough to remember this. But back in 1988, right, Mayfair Mansions, which is a Northeast DC apartment complex, was plagued with drug activity. This was during really the beginning of the crack cocaine epidemic. The Nation of Islam and the minister in D.C., certainly with the blessing of Minister Louis Farrakhan, the Fruit of Islam, which is the security wing of the Nation of Islam, came into the Mayfair Mansions. They essentially occupied that area, and they kicked out the drug dealers.
That's right.
And that was it did become a national story. It was not perfect. A reporter from WRC NBC4 at the time, Joe Johns, who was one of our colleagues, did get roughed up when he was trying to cover it. And that certainly was a bit of a black eye on the operation that otherwise cleaned out drug dealers immediately.
No guns.
It happened immediately. Exactly. It was guns. So
just
for
love.
So for those of you who may not have been here in DC or do not remember it, that is what happened. And I needed to make sure that you understood the context of that. But again, Marcus, again, to your thoughts also about what Zakia was also saying about the impact on Black people in this community, not just the boys, but the Black men that look like Marcus Batchelor and Harold Fisher, if they happen to be walking around in DC.
Yeah, I mean, it is a fundamentally more dangerous community because people so detached from our community and our values are not in charge of law enforcement. I think Zakia's point is so important, right? That the closer you are to a community, the more you understand it, the better you can take care of it. Right now, do I like everything about my elected officials or the government, right? My local government? No, but I know that I can hold them accountable, right? I know that at least to some degree, right, they live in this city, they have those experiences, right? I know where I can find them to hold them accountable. It is a far more dangerous proposition, even for people who are tired of the crime, for you to hand that type of authority over to somebody you don't know, who doesn't share your values, and is demonstrated to you over and over again that they have a disdain for you, for the people who look like you, for your history, and are invested in erasing that. And to give them the authority then over your life and your freedom at the local level is not the solution to our violent crime issue. And so, more than resisting, our local government in this moment and our local communities are going to have to be the alternative to whatever Trump presents to our communities, right? As federal officials try to break up communities, we need to begin coming closer together, right? As they try to usurp the authority of our local elected officials, we need to give them the courage to stand up, right, and sacrifice on our behalf, right? As they try to dismantle, right, the networks that have always kept us safe, and when they try to dismantle the levers of accountability, we need to get braver in the ways that we show up and try to hold people accountable. That's going to be, on us, right? On us as residents, is going to be imperative on our local leaders. But yeah, it is a fundamentally more dangerous space this evening than it was last night for Black men in this city. And that is a very scary proposition, but we have the tools to resist it. And could I say on the historic point, we were also in a much, historically worse position, right? And so don't want to also let Trump's doom and gloom attitude about where we are as a city right now break through, right? We are not kind of the crack and murder capital that I was born into in 1993, right? Even compared in terms of the numbers of homicides, we're not getting anywhere close. And I'm not saying one homicide is not too many, but we are a city much better equipped than we were in the 70s and 80s to face the moment we're in. Unlike the Congress, we've passed 26 consecutive balanced budgets, right? Unlike the Congress, right? We invest in the things, right, that lift young people up, right? Fully fund public schools, right? Do those things that the federal government fails to do over and over again. And so we've got to be the alternative in that way, stand up for those values and say that we are the best government. We're the best leaders of Washington, and we shouldn't let the federal government act like we're just some, banana republic, because that's far from the case.
Well, Marcus, what do you believe this says about the future of home rule for the district?
It's more precarious than it's ever been before. And today demonstrates the president's willingness to use all of his power to dismantle local government. He's also given hints that he is expecting Congress to come back this fall and use their ultimate authority over the district to deepen that power for him. And so that is a very scary proposition. I think it should convince finally the rest of the nation that at the first opportunity we get, we should grant the residents of the district full democracy through DC statehood so that this could never happen again. And we need to continue to beat the drum that Trump is not a competent leader for the District of Columbia. He's going to demonstrate it in very damaging ways for however long he has the authority, but we need to try to rip it from him as quickly as possible.
Zakia, you speak about Black boys specifically, and certainly Black children in general, because it is very likely that Black girls could also be in
100%.
In the sites, and we should not in any way, shape, or form exclude them. But
no, definitely not an exclusion.
No.
The disproportionality of Black males being killed by police and being arrested is it swaths the numbers of others, not even just Black girls, but just other people in general.
But and I guess my point is not about so much the children, but about their parents. From your perspective, what is today's message as a result of this announcement for parents who may not be in crisis, who are paying attention, who have the resources to make sure that their children do what they're supposed to do? But I mean, is this?
It's not just about our children doing what they're supposed to do. Black kids get caught up when they don't do nothing wrong.
But hold on, I get it, but don't miss my point.
Okay, I'm listening. Go ahead.
Don't miss my point. That is this a warning shot for parents? Is this a cautionary tale for parents? What should parents be now thinking about? What is the conversation that parents need to have with their children who haven't done anything wrong ever, who have never been out in the streets ever, who always do what their parents tell them to do? Is this another one of those talks, when we talk about the talk, when Black children and young Black men are pulled over by police officers? What is that conversation? What should it look like? What should it sound like?
That's such an important question. And as I mentioned earlier, we live in a community that borders DC. And so we have actually had these conversations because we have a group of young Black boys that we work with in Montgomery County, Maryland. And we actually had an emergency meeting. I have to share that I actually learned about Trump's initial inclination of taking over DC last week from one of our members from that youth group, because they saw it first and began talking about it as young people, because they do frequent going over to DC just to hang out and to see friends. And so what Black moms mostly and Black fathers as well, have been talking about is that we've been contacting our colleagues, right? We are forming what's called healing circles, political education. We are doing all the things. And we're also talking to our partners in DC. There's a community activist there in Ward 8, Al Malik Farrakhan and others. There's other people, up in Baltimore, the Baltimore Brothers, We Are Us, Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. Black people are getting organized, particularly the DMV community, because we know how dangerous this is for our youth. We know that Black youth, just their skin color is an indictment. They cannot be doing anything. As you saw in our press statement, we list the history of literally generations of Black boys and men where they have had the justice system weaponized really as a continued tool of social control. People need to understand that this is what it's about. This is not about public safety. I can't say that enough. This is not about public safety, everyone. This is about, again, the continuation and the demonization and dehumanization of the Black male identity, the Gen 6, the Scottsboro Boys, Central Park 5. All the young folks know about that because of a movie and a documentary, right? The list literally goes on and on and on. George Stinney, 14 years old. It's still the youngest person to ever be executed in this country. That happened in South Carolina, okay? He was a Black boy accused and convicted within 2 days of raping and killing 2 white girls, and he never did it. So I need parents to understand this is not just about the so-called hoodlums and the bad kids and the so-called bad parents. Our entire people have always been criminalized and had an agenda to harm our people, again, as a continuation of eugenics and social control.
Mm-hmm. Marcus, to Zakia's point, and we still don't know exactly where these members of the National Guard will be specifically. Obviously, we're going to hear more about that later on during the course of this week. But the initial reports from last Thursday night on Friday were tourist areas and so-called hot spots. We still don't have a definition of what hot spots means. But if we're talking about the tourist areas, downtown, Union Station, Capitol Hill, east of Capitol Hill, Eastern Market, that part of town, DuPont Circle, Logan Circle, blah, blah, blah. But what does this mean for east of the river? What do you believe this will mean for Georgia Avenue, South Dakota Avenue, Rhode Island Avenue, those parts of Northeast, parts of Southwest even? What is this going to do to those parts of the city?
Well, I mean, unfortunately for us, that episode has already begun. There were reports from local elected ANC commissioners in Deanwood that there were federal operations happening in that neighborhood yesterday where a suspect in a case was actually fired on. Thank goodness nobody was injured in that exchange. But I think it underscores that even before this announcement was made, Trump's imperative to beef up this federal presence has already resulted in gunfire in residential neighborhoods east of the Anacostia River. And you're seeing them in residential neighborhoods all over. I think that will only intensify. The president also gave handouts to reporters today at the press conference where he showed pictures of, it looks like pictures on scene of people incarcerated on Marionberry Avenue and in neighborhoods in Northeast. So that episode has already begun. And that is what we should expect from a white supremacist president. He has lifted up these photos and said at the press conference, these people won't be your next school teacher. They won't be, they can't be redeemed. And to the point, he wouldn't be saying that if those were white people, if those were white faces on that handout. He is saying that because he has an intent, right, to prove his point by putting as many Black faces arrested on television as possible. It's the only way he can prove his point, because everything else is based on a lie. The only thing he can do is arrest, and pretend it's progress. And that is a very scary proposition for the residents of DC.
Some final thoughts from you, Zakia?
Well, I'd like to know where Van Jones is, right? We need to hear from him because he talked to this president with the First Step Act. And, I remember when Trump was running and he talked about the Blacks and the Black men. Well, I don't think Black men going to be happy about this, Trump. So what's that supposed to do to your brand, right? Just to be honest here, this is ridiculous. We need our people, and I mean this, to get serious immediately. And I mean, we need to unite. It does not require uniformity, but I believe that as a people, we should all agree that Black children deserve love, deserve care, deserve safety, and deserve protection. Our children do not deserve to be shot on sight, and they do not deserve to be snatched off the streets and caged for the rest of their lives or for a perpetual amount of time. That is the history that we know about in this country. Black men already dominate innocent project cases around this country, right? Black men and boys already, dominate exonerations when we look at the data. And so this is the time for us to get real serious. I can't reiterate enough that we already have organizations who are there and can be mobilized. What we need to do is get connected across cities. We have the tools. We have what it needs to protect our own communities. We protect us. Thank you.
Zakia Sankara-Jabbar, Marcus Batchelor, thank you both so much for spending some time with us. Certainly, this is one of the first conversations about this issue, but it will not be the last. And we are going to continue to keep our ears to the ground. Thank you both so very much. I appreciate it.
Good to see you, Marcus. Take care.
Yes, thanks for having me.
That is the Daily Drum for this Monday, August 11th. For News Director Renee Nash, I'm Harold Fisher. Good night.